While I was on a trip with my wife and my male best friend, my flight attendant slipped mu epsilon alpha nu alpha capiotino. Pretend you're sick. Get off this plane. I ignored her. She came back. Please. I'm begging you. 2 hours later. Look, I need you to understand something right off the bat. I absolutely, categorically, no questions asked hate flying. Like, I'm talking sweaty palms, racing heartbeat, existential crisis kind of hate. I'm that guy who white-knuckles the armrest during takeoff, like I'm personally holding the plane in the air through sheer willpower and anxiety. I'm the dude who claps when we land, and I don't even care if people judge me for it. You know why? Because we just defied gravity in a metal tube filled with recycled farts and overpriced peanuts, and I think that deserves some freaking applause. So picture this. I'm crammed into seat 14C on flight 227 to Denver, already regretting every life choice that led me to this moment, when this flight attendant, name tag says Clara, comes shuffling down the aisle looking like she just watched her entire family get taken hostage. I'm talking trembling hands, darting eyes, the whole 9 yards. She's doing that thing where you're trying really hard to look normal, but you're actually screaming internally, you know? I recognized it immediately because that's basically my whole vibe during turbulence. Then she does something that makes my stomach drop faster than we're about to. She slides a cocktail napkin onto my tray table. Just plops it right there between my phone and the Sky Mall catalog I'd been pretending to read. Now, I'm thinking maybe she's asking if I want a drink, right? Maybe she's giving me her number because she thinks I'm cute, which, let's be real, would be a first for any airline employee who's witnessed me board a plane. But no, this woman leans in close enough that I can smell her coffee breath and see the actual fear in her eyes, and I look down at what she's scrawled on that napkin in shaky handwriting. 7 words. Just 7 little words that nearly made me pee my pants right there in 14C. Pretend you're sick. Get off this plane. I'm sorry, what? I read it again, thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe it said, pretend you're slick, like some weird motivational message. Or, pretend you're Rick, which would still be weird, but at least less terrifying. But nope. Sick. Plane. Get off. Those were definitely the words, written in what looked like the handwriting of someone trying to defuse a bomb they didn't know how to defuse. My first thought, and I'm not proud of this, was that maybe I'd accidentally been cast in some elaborate Final Destination reboot and nobody had bothered to tell me. Like, was this my audition? Was there a camera crew somewhere? Because if so, I needed to know my motivation here. Was I playing the guy who lives or the guy who gets impaled by a rogue beverage cart in Act 2? I glanced up at Clara, and she was staring at me with this intensity that made me feel like I was a bomb she was desperately trying to talk down from exploding. Her lips barely moved when she whispered, "Please, I'm begging you. Now, I've had exes beg before. Beg me to stop wearing cargo shorts. Beg me to remember anniversaries. Beg me to understand that I'm fine never actually means I'm fine. But I have never in my life seen someone beg with this level of dramatic desperation. This wasn't please pass the salt begging. This was please God, save us all begging, and honestly, it was freaking me out. Meanwhile, my wife Tara was sitting right next to me in 14B, completely oblivious to the psychological thriller unfolding literally 2 feet away from her. She was deep in her Instagram scroll, probably looking at some influencer's perfectly curated brunch photos or watching a video of a golden retriever doing something adorable. The engines were literally vibrating under us like the plane was clearing its throat before delivering bad news. And she was out here double-tapping pictures of avocado toast. I swear, the woman has the situational awareness of a goldfish in a good mood. 2 seats away in 14E, my best friend Liam was living his best life, loudly attempting to flirt with a woman who very clearly had noise-canceling earbuds in and the universal body language of, "Please leave me alone forever." But Liam, bless his heart, has never met a social cue he couldn't completely ignore. He was mid-sentence in what I'm sure he thought was a charming story about his CrossFit routine when I made eye contact with him. And he just gave me this big, goofy thumbs up like everything was totally normal. Nothing about this was normal. I looked back at Clara, trying to convey with my eyes alone that I needed more information, preferably in a format that didn't involve cryptic napkin messages. She glanced around the cabin like she was checking for snipers, then leaned in even closer. "Please," she repeated, and her voice cracked a little. "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't serious." "Ma'am, I thought, I once had a girlfriend tell me we needed to talk, right now. And even that didn't have this level of urgency. This was some spy movie nonsense, and I was decidedly not qualified to be in a spy movie. I was the guy who got anxious ordering at Chipotle because there were too many decisions to make under pressure. I tried to laugh it off, going for casual and breezy, though I'm pretty sure it came out more like a nervous hiccup. Ha ha. Good one. I muttered, attempting a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. Really had me going there for a second. But Clara didn't laugh. She didn't smile. She didn't do that thing where she goes, gotcha. And we all have a good chuckle about the silly prank. Her face remained deadly serious, and she kept darting glances across the cabin like she was tracking enemy movement in a video game. That's when I started to think that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a prank. That maybe I should actually be concerned about whatever fresh hell was unfolding at 30,000 feet. I followed her gaze and noticed things I hadn't paid attention to before. Across the aisle, some guy in a gray hoodie was gripping his armrests so tight his knuckles had gone completely white, like he was trying to squeeze the actual secrets of the universe out of that cheap airline plastic. Behind him, a woman in business clothes, expensive suit, the kind that screams, "I make more money than you ever will," kept glancing toward the cockpit every few seconds like she'd left something important up there. Maybe her soul, maybe her sense of professional boundaries. Who knows? I turned to Tara, thinking maybe I should loop her into this increasingly weird situation. Hey, so, something kind of strange just. Relax, she cut me off without even looking up from her phone. You always overthink everything. She said it with that particular tone she uses, the one that somehow manages to be both soothing and condescending at the same time. Tara has exactly two modes, calm and judgmental calm. This was definitely the latter. Liam, having apparently struck out with noise-canceling earbud woman, leaned across the aisle and stage whispered, "Bro, maybe she just thinks you're cute." He waggled his eyebrows suggestively, like we were in a rom-com and not potentially in actual danger. Yeah, because nothing says romance quite like pretend you're sick and get off this plane before something terrible happens. That's definitely how all the great love stories start. Move over, Romeo and Juliet. Make way for guy who got weird napkin message and flight attendant who gave it to him. I looked back down at the napkin, those 7 words still staring up at me like an accusation. The plane's engines roared louder, preparing for takeoff, and I felt that familiar knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. But this time, it wasn't just the normal flying anxiety. This was something else entirely. This was the kind of anxiety that comes with actual, legitimate reasons to be anxious. Clara had moved on, pushing her cart down the aisle, but I could see her hands were still shaking. She nearly dropped a can of ginger ale on some poor guy in row 15. I crumpled the napkin in my fist and shoved it in my pocket, my heart absolutely hammering in my chest. The plane lurched forward, beginning to taxi toward the runway, and I realized with growing dread that I was about to make a decision. Either I was going to trust this random flight attendant who'd just handed me the world's most concerning cocktail napkin, or I was going to sit here and hope this was all just some massive misunderstanding. Spoiler alert, I chose wrong. Okay, so here's the thing about trying to laugh off a potentially life-threatening situation while strapped into a metal death tube hurtling down a runway. It doesn't really work. I mean, I tried. I gave it my best shot, sitting there with that crumpled napkin burning a hole in my pocket like radioactive evidence, attempting to convince myself that this was all just some elaborate misunderstanding. Maybe Clara was new and had accidentally given me someone else's note. Maybe she was testing out a new customer service approach. Welcome aboard. Here's a complimentary panic attack with your peanuts. But the more I tried to rationalize it, the more I noticed things. Little things. Weird things. The kind of things that, in retrospect, should have sent me sprinting toward the emergency exit like my life depended on it. Which, spoiler alert, it kind of did. The plane was still taxiing, doing that slow roll toward the runway where we'd either take off successfully or become a cautionary tale on the evening news. I could feel the familiar rumble of the engines beneath my feet, that low vibration that always makes me think about how we're basically trusting our lives to what's essentially a giant flying toaster oven. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, going into that weird mood lighting phase that's supposed to be calming but really just makes everything look like a horror movie set. I shifted in my seat, trying to get a better view of the cabin without being obvious about it. Casual surveillance. Just a regular guy definitely not freaking out about a cryptic napkin message, casually observing his fellow passengers like some discount James Bond. Clara was still making her way down the aisle with the beverage cart, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept glancing back toward the front of the plane like she was expecting something to explode. Which, given the circumstances, was not a comforting observation. That's when I really started paying attention to gray hoodie guy across the aisle. And let me tell you, this dude was not okay. I mean, nobody's really okay on a plane. We're all just various degrees of uncomfortable and mildly terrified. But this guy had taken it to another level. His hands were still death gripping those armrests like he was holding on for dear life, which technically we all were, but he was doing it with the intensity of someone who knew something the rest of US didn't. His knuckles were so white they were practically glowing, and I swear I could see a vein pulsing in his temple from 3 feet away. He was youngish, maybe late 20s, with the kind of beard that said, "I'm either a hipster or I've given up on society." His hoodie was pulled up despite the cabin being approximately the temperature of a sauna, and he kept his head down, eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him like it contained the secrets to the universe. But every few seconds, his eyes would flick up, scanning the cabin with this weird, jerky motion that reminded me of a bird that spotted a cat. A really nervous bird. A bird that maybe knew the cat was planning something. Then there was business suit woman, 3 rows up on the other side. I had a pretty good view of her from my angle, and she was giving off major suspicious vibes. She had that whole corporate power player thing going on. Designer suit that probably cost more than my car. Perfect hair that hadn't moved since she boarded. The kind of makeup that screamed, "I'm important, and I know it." But underneath all that polish, she was twitchy as hell. Every 5 seconds, and I started counting because that's apparently what I do when I'm nervous, she'd crane her neck to look toward the cockpit. Not subtle glances, either. Full-on head turns, like she was waiting for someone to emerge or something to happen. Her laptop was open on her tray table, but the screen was dark. She wasn't working. She was just sitting there, pretending to work, while actually engaging in some weird cockpit watching vigil that was setting off every alarm bell in my already over-alarmed brain. "Excuse me, could I get a tomato juice?" Tara's voice cut through my paranoid observations, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. She was flagging down Clara, who'd made it to our row with the beverage cart. "Of course," Clara said, and her voice was steady, professional, giving absolutely no indication that she'd just handed me a note that basically said, "You're gonna die if you don't bail." She poured the tomato juice with hands that were only slightly shaking, handed it to Tara with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, then looked at me. "Anything for you, sir?" The way she said "sir" had this weird emphasis on it, like she was trying to communicate something through sheer force of will and proper title usage. I opened my mouth, not entirely sure what was about to come out, when Tara cut in again. "He's fine," she said, patting my arm in that condescending way that somehow made me feel like a child and an idiot simultaneously. "He's just nervous about flying. He always gets like this." She took a sip of her tomato juice, because apparently my wife is one of those psychopaths who actually enjoys drinking vegetable juice at 7,000 feet, and gave me that look. You know the one. The "you're being dramatic again" look that I'd become intimately familiar with over our 5 years of marriage. "I'm not nervous," I protested, which was a complete lie, and we all knew it. "I'm just observant." "Observantly nervous," Tara corrected, scrolling back to her phone. "It's fine, babe. We do this every time we fly. The plane is not going to crash just because you're anxious about it crashing. That's not how physics works. Actually, I wanted to say, I'm not worried about normal crashing. I'm worried about whatever the hell is happening that made a flight attendant give me a note that sounded like it was written by someone in a witness protection program. But I didn't say that, because A, it sounded insane when I put it that way, and B, Tara had already checked out of this conversation and returned to the much more interesting world of Instagram. Clara moved on with her cart, and I watched her go, trying to catch her eye, but she was deliberately not looking at me. Great. Awesome. Nothing suspicious about that at all. Liam leaned across the aisle again, apparently having given up on his seduction attempt with the woman who'd upgraded her earbuds to actual headphones. A clear escalation in the leave me alone technology arms race. "Bro," he said, Because every sentence Liam speaks starts with bro. You really need to chill. Maybe do some of that breathing thing your therapist taught you. I don't have a therapist, I hissed back. Yeah, but you should, he said cheerfully. You've got mad anxiety, dude. It's not healthy. He pulled out his own phone, probably to text the 15 other women he was currently talking to, which was Liam speak for sending hey beautiful texts to at random intervals. I slumped back in my seat, feeling the weight of the napkin in my pocket like it was made of lead instead of cheap paper. The plane was picking up speed now, really committing to this whole takeoff thing, and I could feel that familiar pressure building in my chest. But this time, I couldn't tell if it was regular flight anxiety or legitimate fear based on actual concerning circumstances. Gray hoodie guy chose that moment to pull out his phone, and I watched, because apparently I'm a creep now, as he typed something out with shaking fingers. His screen was angled just enough that I could see he was texting someone, but not enough to read what he was saying. He hit send, then immediately powered the phone down and shoved it in his pocket, his whole body rigid with tension. Business suit woman had closed her laptop and was now just staring straight ahead, but her hands were clasped together so tightly in her lap that her fingers were turning red. She looked like she was praying, or maybe just trying really hard not to throw up. Honestly, on a plane, those two things often look pretty similar. The engines roared louder, and I felt that lurch in my stomach as we accelerated down the runway. This was it, the point of no return. Either we were taking off, or I was about to do something incredibly dramatic that would either save everyone's lives or make me look like the world's biggest idiot. I glanced at Clara one more time, and she was standing in her jump seat near the front, buckled in for takeoff, but her eyes were locked on me. Even from this distance, I could see the plea in them, the desperate hope that I'd listened to her warning. The nose of the plane tilted up, and we left the ground. I'd made my choice, and I really hoped it was the right one. Narrator voice, it was not the right one. So there we were, wheels up, committed to this whole flying thing like a bad relationship you should have ended 3 red flags ago, but didn't because you'd already paid for the couple's massage package. The plane was climbing, that awful sensation of gravity, trying its absolute best to pull us back down to earth where we belonged, and my phone buzzed in my pocket like an angry bee that had just realized it was trapped in denim prison. Now, technically, I was supposed to have it on airplane mode. We all know this. The flight attendants had done their little safety dance, demonstrated the seat belts like we're all morons who've never sat down before, and explicitly told us to put our devices in airplane mode or turn them off completely. But here's a confession. I always wait until the last possible second to do it, because I have this completely irrational fear that the exact moment I disconnect from the internet will be the exact moment something incredibly important happens that I need to know about. Like, what if World War III starts during my flight and I miss the memo? What if someone finally proves that birds are real? What if my fantasy football lineup gets screwed because I didn't check it one last time? So I pulled out my phone. Sorry, FAA, please don't arrest me. And saw 3 texts from my sister Maya lighting up my screen. Maya is 2 years younger than me, infinitely more successful, and has made it her life's mission to remind me of both of these facts at every possible opportunity. She's a corporate lawyer at some big firm in Chicago, the kind of person who wears power suits and says things like, "Let's circle back on that," without a hint of irony. Meanwhile, I work in IT support, which is basically professional babysitting for people who can't figure out why their computer won't turn on when it's not plugged in. The first text read, "Mom's asking about you again." The second, "She wants to know if you and Tara are still together," which is mom code for, "When are you giving me grandchildren?" The third, "Send a pic. She wants proof of life. And couple photos. You know how she is." I could practically hear Maya's voice in my head. That particular blend of amusement and exasperation she reserves specifically for our mother's antics. Our mom, bless her heart, had turned worrying into an Olympic sport and somehow managed to win gold every single time. She'd called me 4 times before this flight to make sure I had my license, my wallet, my phone charger, my common sense, and my will to live. Not necessarily in that order. The plane hit a pocket of turbulence, because of course it did, and my stomach did that fun little flip that makes you question every choice you've ever made. I gripped my phone tighter, my other hand white-knuckling the armrest in a way that probably would have made me buddies with Gray Hoodie Guy if we weren't both too terrified to socialize. I started typing back to Maya, my thumbs working on autopilot. Sure. Might die. Pray for me. Then I paused, looking at those words on my screen, and felt a weird chill run down my spine. Because usually when I said stuff like that, it was just my standard dramatic flair, the kind of dark humor that made Maya roll her eyes and tell me I was being ridiculous. But right now, with Clara's napkin note burning a hole in my pocket and the general vibe of this flight being somewhere between unsettling and legitimate horror movie, those words felt less like a joke and more like a premonition. I hit send anyway, because what else was I going to do? Text back. Actually, a flight attendant gave me a weird note, and I think something bad might happen, but I'm too much of a coward to do anything about it. Yeah, that would go over great. Maya would probably just tell me to stop watching so many conspiracy theory videos on YouTube, which, fair, but also not helpful in this particular situation. Her response came back almost immediately, a laughing emoji. Just one. Not even the crying laughing one, just the regular laughing one. Like my potential demise was mildly amusing, but not quite hilarious. Classic Maya. I could picture her in her office, probably in the middle of some important conference call, taking a break to mock her older brother's flight anxiety like it was her civic duty. I glanced over at Tara, who was now watching some cooking video with the sound off, reading the subtitles, and occasionally nodding like the person making a casserole was imparting ancient wisdom. The plane leveled out a bit, that initial climb to cruising altitude phase starting to settle, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Freedom. Sort of. The freedom to move around a confined metal tube while suspended thousands of feet in the air. Living the dream. But Clara. Oh man, Clara was not settling. While everyone else was starting to relax, getting comfortable, pulling out their books and tablets and overpriced airport snacks, she was pacing the aisles like a caged animal. She'd check an overhead bin, move 3 steps, check another one, move again. Her face had this fixed smile plastered on it, the kind of smile you give when someone's holding you at gunpoint, but you're trying to act natural. I'd seen that smile before, usually in hostage negotiation movies right before everything goes sideways. She pretended to adjust someone's air vent in row 9, then moved to help an elderly woman in row 12 with her reading light. But her eyes, God, her eyes were everywhere. Scanning faces, counting passengers, looking toward the cockpit, then back at the cabin, then specifically at me for just a split second before moving on. It was like watching someone play the world's most stressful game of Where's Waldo, except Waldo might be a terrorist, and the prize for finding him was not dying. I considered pressing the call button. You know, that little button above your head that summons a flight attendant to your seat like you're a feudal lord requesting more wine from your servants. I stared at it for a solid 30 seconds, my finger hovering inches away, trying to calculate whether pressing it would make me look insane or rational. What would I even say when Clara came over? Hey, so about that napkin. Could you elaborate on the whole we're all gonna die thing? Maybe provide some context? Perhaps a PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, no? That would go over about as well as asking for a parachute during boarding. Plus, what if I was wrong? What if this whole thing was just a misunderstanding, or Clara was having some kind of mental breakdown, or I'd completely misread the situation because my anxiety had finally achieved sentience and decided to gaslight me? I'd look like a complete idiot. Tara would never let me live it down, and I'd probably end up on some no-fly list for being weird on a plane, which felt like it should be protected under the First Amendment, but probably wasn't. So I did what any rational, logical person would do in this situation. Absolutely nothing. I sat there like a bump on a log, paralyzed by indecision and social anxiety, watching Clara pace and gray hoodie guy sweat and business suit woman stare at the cockpit like she was trying to teleport through the door with her mind. Liam had his headphones in now, nodding along to whatever terrible EDM music he was into this week, completely oblivious to the psychological thriller unfolding around him. The man had the self-preservation instincts of a golden retriever at a fireworks show. Zero awareness, maximum vibes. My phone buzzed again. Maya, Mom says she loves you and to text her when you land. I typed back. Will do. If I land. This time she sent back the eye roll emoji, which felt appropriate. Then she added, stop being dramatic. You're literally fine. Famous last words, I thought, shoving my phone into airplane mode, and then immediately second-guessing whether I should have sent one last text, something meaningful, Maybe a heartfelt goodbye to my loved ones just in case. And that's when I realized I'd officially crossed the line from reasonably anxious to completely unhinged. I was sitting here planning my farewell text like I was in a movie, all because of a napkin note and some weird vibes. Maybe Tara was right. Maybe I did overthink everything. Maybe I needed to calm down, take a breath, and accept that sometimes flights are just weird and people are just strange and not everything is a conspiracy. But then Clara walked past again, and as she did, she dropped something on my tray table. A cocktail napkin. A fresh one. I looked down at it, my heart rate spiking. One word, hastily scrawled. Soon. Yeah, I wasn't overthinking anything. Okay, so let me paint you a picture of where my mental state was at this exact moment. Completely and utterly losing it. That second napkin, the one with just the word soon scrawled on it like a threat from a discount horror movie villain, had officially pushed me over the edge from concerned passenger to guy who's about to make a scene at 30,000 feet. My heart was doing this fun thing where it felt like it was trying to escape through my ribcage. My palms were sweating like I'd just run a marathon in a sauna, and I'm pretty sure I could feel each individual beat of my pulse in my eyeballs. Is that normal? That doesn't sound normal. I looked up at Clara, who was already 3 rows ahead, pushing her cart like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just delivered what was essentially a countdown timer to my potential doom via absorbent paper product. She didn't look back, didn't acknowledge me, just kept doing her flight attendant thing with that same plastered-on smile that was starting to look more like a grimace with each passing second. Soon. What the hell did soon mean? Soon as in 5 minutes? Soon as in when we hit cruising altitude? Soon as in, hey, maybe start making peace with your maker because things are about to get real weird real fast. The ambiguity was somehow worse than the original message. At least get off this plane had clear instructions. Soon was just ominous. It was the we need to talk of airplane napkin warnings. I crumpled the second napkin and shoved it in my pocket with the first one, because apparently I was collecting them now. Maybe I could frame them someday, assuming I lived long enough to have a someday. The napkins that saved my life would make a great conversation piece at parties, right next to my collection of emotional baggage and unresolved childhood issues. Tara had moved on from cooking videos to some fashion influencer trying on outfits, still completely absorbed in the digital world, still blissfully unaware that her husband was potentially sitting on a ticking time bomb of unspecified danger. I envied her ignorance. I really did. She was over there worried about whether wide-leg pants were still in style, and I was over here wondering if I'd live long enough to worry about pants at all. That's when Clara made her move. She came back down the aisle, but this time without the cart, moving with purpose, and she crouched down next to my seat like a spy meeting her contact in a crowded cafe. Her face was inches from mine, close enough that I could see the fear in her eyes, the way her mascara had smudged slightly from what I assumed was stress sweating, and smell the coffee and mint on her breath from whatever emergency caffeine situation she'd handled before this flight. Do it now, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drone of the engines. Pretend to faint. If you stay here, you won't land alive. I blinked at her, my brain trying to process what she was asking me to do while simultaneously short-circuiting from sheer panic. You want me to fake a faint? I whispered back, which came out more like a squeak. In front of my wife? She's a nurse. She'll call me out in approximately 0.3 seconds. She once diagnosed a guy having a heart attack at Costco while buying rotisserie chicken. I'm not going to be able to fake her out with amateur hour theatrics. And that was true. Tara had seen me at my worst. Food poisoning, actual flu. That time I thought I was dying, but it turned out I'd just eaten too much spicy Thai food. And she had a built-in BS detector that was more accurate than a polygraph machine. The woman could spot fake illness from a mile away. It was both impressive and incredibly inconvenient. Clara's eyes didn't waver. If anything, they got more intense, boring into mine like she was trying to transfer the severity of the situation directly into my brain through sheer force of will. Then make it convincing, she said, each word deliberate and heavy with meaning. I'm not asking you to win an Oscar. I'm asking you to survive. Well, when you put it like that, suddenly my concerns about looking stupid seemed pretty trivial. Nothing like the threat of literal death to put your priorities in perspective, right? I took a deep breath, glanced at Tara one more time, still engrossed in her phone. God bless her oblivious heart. and made the executive decision to commit to this insane plan. If I was going to do this, I needed to go full method actor. Daniel Day-Lewis didn't become Lincoln by half-assing it, and I wasn't going to survive whatever fresh hell was brewing on this plane by giving a mediocre performance. So I did what any reasonable person would do in this completely unreasonable situation. I went for it. I clutched my chest with both hands, really digging my fingers in there like I was trying to physically hold my heart inside my body. My face contorted into what I hoped was a convincing expression of pain and not just severe constipation. There's a fine line there, and I wasn't entirely sure which side I'd landed on. I let out a groan, starting low and building to a crescendo, really selling the whole "something is very wrong with me" vibe. "Oh no," I croaked, my voice coming out strangled and dramatic. "My heart. I can't, something's wrong." Liam's head whipped around so fast I'm surprised he didn't get whiplash. "Dude, what?" But I was committed now. I was in it. I let my body go slack, slumping in my seat, my head lolling to the side like a rag doll that had given up on life. I even threw in a little "I flutter" for good measure, because I'd seen that in movies and it seemed appropriately theatrical. Tara, however, did not react the way I'd hoped. She didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She didn't immediately spring into nurse mode and start checking my vitals. Instead, she glanced over at me, paused her video, and rolled her eyes so hard I'm surprised they didn't fall out of her head and roll down the aisle. "You had 3 airport sandwiches," she said flatly, her tone dripping with the kind of exasperation usually reserved for toddlers throwing tantrums in grocery stores. "You'll live. Just breathe through it. Maybe stop eating mystery meat from Terminal B next time." I wanted to break character and tell her that this was not, in fact, about the questionable food choices I'd made at Gate 27, but Clara swooped in before I could blow my cover. She was suddenly there, all professional concern and trained medical response, her hand on my shoulder like she'd just discovered I was in actual distress. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked loudly, projecting her voice so other passengers would notice. "You look very pale. Let's get you some water and some air." "He's fine," Tara insisted, still scrolling through her phone. "He does this every time he flies. It's anxiety, not a cardiac event. Trust me, I've seen both." But Clara was already grabbing my arm, surprisingly strong for someone who probably weighed 120 pounds soaking wet, and hoisting me to my feet. "Sir, please, let me help you to the front. We have oxygen there. Can you walk?" I nodded weakly, leaning on her like I actually needed the support, which honestly wasn't that far from the truth because my legs had gone all wobbly from the adrenaline spike. Liam was half standing now, looking concerned in that way guys do when they're not sure if they should help or if getting involved would be weird. "Bro, you okay?" he asked, reaching out but not quite touching me. "You need me to come with?" "He's fine," Tara repeated, but there was a slight edge of doubt creeping into her voice now. "Right? You're fine?" She'd finally put down her phone, which was how I knew she was at least 10% concerned. Maybe 15%. Clara was already guiding me down the aisle, one hand firmly on my elbow, and she leaned in close as we moved, her lips barely moving. "Don't look back," she whispered, so quiet I almost missed it under the engine noise. "Your seat wasn't assigned by accident." And just like that, my performance stopped being a performance. The fear that shot through me was 100% real, unfiltered, genuine terror. My legs actually did feel weak now, my heart actually was racing, and the sick feeling in my stomach had nothing to do with airport sandwiches and everything to do with the sudden realization that I wasn't just being paranoid. This was real. Whatever this was, it was happening, and I had been specifically targeted. My seat wasn't random. Someone had put me there on purpose, which meant someone knew I was on this flight, which meant someone had plans for me, or for whoever was supposed to be in that seat. And none of those plans probably involved me landing safely in Denver and going about my normal boring life. We were almost to the front of the plane now, passing through first class, where people were sipping champagne and enjoying warm nuts like they weren't currently sharing airspace with whatever nightmare scenario was unfolding back in economy. Clara's grip on my arm tightened slightly, reassuring and terrifying all at once. That's when I stopped acting entirely and started genuinely freaking out. Because ignorance might be bliss, but knowledge? Knowledge was absolutely terrifying. So there I was, being half-dragged, half-guided toward the front of the plane by a flight attendant who'd apparently moonlighted as a CIA operative, trying to maintain my sick passenger act while internally screaming loud enough to shatter the windows. The physics of it all was honestly impressive. How I managed to walk in a straight line while my brain was simultaneously melting down like a nuclear reactor having a bad day. If they gave out awards for most convincing performance while experiencing existential terror, I'd be taking home the gold, folks. Clara kept her grip firm on my arm, steering me through the first-class cabin where people were living their best lives in seats that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Some guy in a cashmere sweater, because of course he was wearing cashmere on a plane, glanced up from his iPad with mild interest, like watching a potentially dying man stumble past was mildly more entertaining than whatever stock report he'd been reading. Welcome to first class, where your emotional detachment comes with free champagne and extra legroom. We pushed through the curtain into the galley area, that weird liminal space at the front of the plane where flight attendants hide and probably talk about how much they hate us all. There was another attendant there. Male, early 30s, name tag said Ben, and he took one look at me and Clara and immediately understood something was up. His eyes went wide for just a fraction of a second before he smoothed his expression into professional concern. "Is he all right?" Ben asked, but the way he said it made it clear he already knew the answer was no. Just not in the way most people would assume. "He needs some water and air," Clara said, the code in her words so obvious it might as well have been written in neon lights. "Can you grab an oxygen mask?" "Just as a precaution." Ben nodded and moved toward the front, but I noticed he didn't actually go for any oxygen equipment. Instead, he knocked twice on the cockpit door, two sharp raps that sounded more like a signal than a polite, "Hey, can I come in?" kind of knock. The door cracked open slightly, and I could see him lean in, whispering something to whoever was inside. Probably something along the lines of, "Houston, we have a problem," and his name is the terrified guy in 14C who finally got the memo. Clara positioned me near a jump seat, her hand still on my shoulder, and leaned in close enough that her hair brushed against my cheek. To anyone watching, it probably looked like a caring flight attendant making sure I didn't pass out and crack my head open on something expensive. But what she whispered in my ear made my blood run colder than the air conditioning blasting from the vents above us. "You're sitting in a seat meant for someone else," she said, her voice barely a breath. "They think you're him." I froze. Like, completely froze. Every muscle in my body locked up simultaneously, and if I wasn't already pretending to be sick, this would have been a great time to start. "Who's they?" I managed to croak out, my throat suddenly drier than a popcorn fart in the Sahara. Her eyes flicked back toward the cabin, then to me, then to Ben, who was still at the cockpit door engaged in what looked like an intense whispered conversation. "The reason this flight might not land," she said simply, like she was telling me the in-flight movie selection and not dropping a bomb that my life was in danger because of a seating mix-up. I wanted to laugh. I really did. Because this was absurd. This was beyond absurd. This was the kind of thing that happened in bad thriller novels written by people who'd clearly never flown commercial before. You're telling me I was about to die because of airline seat assignments? The same airline that once put me in a middle seat between a guy who brought tuna fish and a woman who thought personal space was just a suggestion? That level of incompetence had accidentally put me in a terrorist seat or a mob informant spot or whatever fresh hell this was. But looking at Clara's face, seeing the genuine fear there, I knew this wasn't a joke. This wasn't some elaborate prank show where Ashton Kutcher was going to pop out and tell me I'd been punked. This was real life, and real life had decided that today, my number was up because I'd chosen the wrong damn seat on Expedia. "I just wanted the aisle," I whispered back, and I'm not proud to admit my voice cracked a little. "I just wanted easy bathroom access. That's it. That's my whole evil plan. Convenient peeing." Clara's expression softened for just a moment, something almost like sympathy crossing her face. "I know," she said. "Wrong place, wrong time. Story of life, right?" Ben returned from the cockpit, his face carefully neutral, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were balled into fists at his sides. "Captain's been informed," he said to Clara, and again, the subtext was screaming at a frequency only dogs and anxious passengers could hear. That's when the overhead speakers crackled to life, and the captain's voice came through, smooth and calm as a yoga instructor leading a meditation session. "You know the voice. That carefully trained pilot tone that's designed to make you feel safe even if the plane is actively falling out of the sky. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to be returning to the gate due to a brief mechanical issue that needs to be addressed. Nothing to be concerned about, just a precautionary measure. We apologize for the inconvenience and should have you on your way shortly. A mechanical issue. Right. And I'm the Queen of England. If this was really about a mechanical problem, why was Clara looking at me like I'd just dodged a bullet? Why was Ben positioned near the cockpit door like he was guarding it? Why did I feel like I was in the middle of a situation that was about to go from weird to call the National Guard in about 30 seconds? The plane banked slightly, beginning its turn back toward the airport, and I could hear the groans and complaints starting to ripple through the cabin. Someone behind us muttered something about missing their connection. Another person complained loudly about an important meeting they were going to be late for. A baby started crying, because babies have a sixth sense for inconvenient timing. And somewhere in the back, I could hear Liam's distinctive laugh, probably making jokes about the whole situation because the man had the self-preservation instincts of a lemming with a death wish. But me? I was too busy processing the fact that somewhere on this plane, someone thought I was someone else. Someone important enough to target. Someone whose presence on this flight was significant enough that people were willing to do. What exactly? Blow up the plane. Hijack it. Give us all really aggressive food poisoning? The possibilities were endless and all of them sucked. What do I do? I asked Clara, my sick passenger act completely abandoned now because honestly, what was the point? I was probably about to die anyway. Might as well die with some dignity and clear answers. You stay here, she said firmly. You don't go back to your seat. You don't talk to anyone. When we land and the door opens, you get off first with Ben and me. You don't look back. You don't collect your carry-on. You just move. Understand? I nodded, my mouth too dry to form actual words. This was happening. This was really happening. I'd woken up this morning worried about whether I'd packed enough phone chargers and if the hotel would have a decent gym, and now I was caught up in some kind of spy movie situation that I was wildly unqualified for. Ben handed me a bottle of water. Actual water this time, not code for, we're all going to die, and I drank it gratefully, my hands shaking enough that I almost dropped it twice. The plane was descending now. That sinking feeling in your stomach that's usually just uncomfortable, but now felt like a countdown timer ticking away. Through the gap in the curtain, I could see into the cabin. Tara was craning her neck, probably looking for me, her phone in her hand like she was debating whether to text or call. Liam was still oblivious, headphones firmly in place, living in his own little world of EDM and bad decisions. And scattered throughout the cabin were the other passengers, gray hoodie guy, business suit woman, and who knows how many others, all playing their parts in whatever twisted theater production this had become. The captain's voice came back on. Flight attendants, prepare for landing. Clara and Ben exchanged a look, some silent communication passing between them that I wasn't privy to, and Clara's hand found my shoulder again. Almost over, she said quietly. Just hold on a little longer. But as we descended toward the runway, engines whining, my stomach churning with a mixture of relief and terror, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't almost over. This was just beginning. Here's something they don't tell you in those cheerful airline safety videos where everyone's smiling and the cartoon passengers calmly put on their oxygen masks. Returning to the gate after you've already taken off is one of the most psychologically disturbing experiences you can have while fully clothed and sober. It's like getting dumped by someone, walking away all dignified, and then having to come back because you forgot your keys. Except in this case, the keys might be a bomb and the ex might be a terrorist. Or something. I was still unclear on the specifics, but the vibes were definitely catastrophically bad. The plane was doing that weird deceleration thing, engines changing pitch like they were sighing in disappointment, and I could feel the collective confusion radiating from the cabin behind me. People were muttering. Phones were coming out despite us still being in the air, because rules don't matter when you're inconvenienced, apparently, and I could hear the rising tide of annoyance that comes with unexpected delays. Someone was definitely going to leave a one-star review on whatever airline rating site angry people use to vent their impotent rage. But me? I was standing in the galley area with Clara and Ben, watching through the gap in the curtain as the cabin slowly transformed from mildly annoyed passengers to something is very wrong here territory. And let me tell you, The shift was subtle but unmistakable, like watching a pot of water go from simmering to full boil. First, there was the guy in the black jacket. Not gray hoodie guy. This was a different person entirely, because apparently this flight had collected suspicious characters like I collect anxiety disorders. Black jacket guy was sitting in row 7, and I hadn't paid much attention to him before because he'd seemed normal. You know, generic business traveler normal. The kind of guy you see on every flight, wearing clothes that cost more than they should and carrying a leather laptop bag that screamed, "I'm important but approachable." Except now he was standing up. And not in the "I need to stretch my legs" way or the "I'm getting something from the overhead bin" way. He stood up like he was about to give a speech, or start a fight, or do something equally dramatic and unwelcome. His posture was all wrong. Rigid, alert, predatory even. Like a cat that spotted a mouse and is calculating the exact angle of attack. And then he looked directly at me. Not a casual glance. Not an accidental eye contact moment that you both immediately look away from, because prolonged eye contact with strangers is uncomfortable and possibly a mating ritual in some cultures. No, this was a full-on stare, his eyes locking onto mine through that gap in the curtain with the intensity of a sniper acquiring a target. His expression was cold, calculating, the kind of look that makes your lizard brain start screaming, "Predator! Run! Climb a tree! Do something!" Then his gaze slid to Clara, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or confirmation. Like he'd just verified something he'd suspected, and now he was adjusting his plans accordingly. "That's him," Clara breathed beside me, so quiet I almost didn't hear her. "That's the trigger." The trigger. As in, the guy who triggers the thing. The bad thing. The thing that goes boom or causes chaos or ruins everyone's day in a spectacular and possibly fatal fashion. My brain was having trouble processing this information, probably because it was too busy panicking to handle complex data analysis. Black jacket guy slowly sat back down, but his eyes never left our position. He pulled out his phone. Again, we were still technically in the air, but apparently phone rules were just suggestions today, and typed something with deliberate precision. His thumb moved across the screen, hit send, and then he pocketed the device and folded his hands in his lap like a choir boy waiting for service to start. "Oh, we're so screwed," I muttered, which was probably not the most helpful observation, but definitely the most honest one. That's when the chaos really started bubbling up like a pot of water someone forgot about on the stove. From somewhere in the back of the plane, way back, past the bathroom area where people go to have existential crises and question their life choices, I heard a voice. Young, male, cracking with either puberty or panic. "I can't do this," the voice said, not quite shouting, but definitely loud enough to carry. I can't. The teenage boy. I craned my neck to see through the curtain, catching a glimpse of a kid who couldn't have been more than 17, maybe 18 tops, standing in the aisle near row 30-something. He had that look teenagers get when they're in over their heads, pale, sweaty, eyes darting around like a cornered animal. His hands were shaking so badly I could see it from 40 feet away, and he kept touching his backpack in the overhead bin like he was checking to make sure it was still there. Or maybe making sure it wasn't about to explode. Hard to say which option was worse. An older woman next to him, someone's grandma type, cardigan and reading glasses, the whole wholesome package, was trying to calm him down, patting his arm and speaking in soothing tones that I couldn't quite hear. But the kid wasn't having it. He pulled away from her, his voice rising. "You don't understand. I can't. They said I had to, but I can't." Ben moved toward the curtain, his hand reaching for something on his belt that I suddenly realized might be more than just his standard flight attendant equipment. Clara grabbed his arm, shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she mouthed. "Wait. Wait for what?" I wanted to scream. Wait for the plane to explode. Wait for whatever nightmare scenario was unfolding to reach its natural conclusion. But I kept my mouth shut because I'd already proven that my instincts in crisis situations were roughly as reliable as a magic 8-ball with trust issues. That's when Liam's voice cut through the tension like a chainsaw through butter, loud and cheerful and completely, devastatingly oblivious. "Bro," he called out from his seat, pulling out one earbud and gesturing at the general chaos. "Are they shooting a movie or something? Is this like one of those prank shows? This is wild." Several passengers turned to look at him. Black jacket guy's head swiveled in his direction. Even teenage panic attack kid paused his meltdown to stare at this idiot who thought we were filming a reality show while potentially careening toward disaster. That's my best friend, I said to no one in particular. The guy who thinks we're on candid camera while the plane might be rigged to explode. That's who I chose to be friends with. This is the quality of my decision-making on full display. Clara's lips twitched despite everything, like she wanted to laugh, but remembered that laughing during a potential terrorist situation was probably poor form. And then, because apparently this situation wasn't complicated enough, two passengers in first class stood up simultaneously. They'd been sitting there the whole time, blending in with the champagne sippers and cashmere wearers, looking for all the world like regular business travelers who'd paid too much for slightly better seats. But now they were standing, and their hands were moving to their waists, and they were pulling out badges that caught the overhead lights and glinted with official authority. Air marshals. We had freaking air marshals on the plane, which meant someone, somewhere, had known this flight was going to be a problem before we even took off. Which meant this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing. This was planned, coordinated, a whole production that I'd stumbled into like an extra who'd accidentally wandered onto the wrong movie set. The marshals. One woman with severe bangs and an expression that could cut glass. One man who looked like he bench-pressed small cars for fun, moved with practiced efficiency. They weren't shouting or making a scene yet, but their body language screamed federal agents about to ruin someone's day. And everyone within visual range immediately understood that playtime was over. Severe Bang's marshal made eye contact with Clara, some silent communication passing between them, and I realized with growing horror that Clara wasn't just a concerned flight attendant. She was part of this. She was in on whatever operation was happening. She'd known from the beginning that this flight was compromised, and she'd chosen to warn me specifically because, oh God, because whoever was supposed to be in my seat was important enough to protect, important enough to have federal resources devoted to keeping them alive, important enough that multiple agencies were involved in whatever elaborate security theater this was. And I'd accidentally taken their seat because I wanted aisle access and slightly more legroom. You've got to be kidding me, I said out loud. To the universe, to whatever cosmic force had decided that today was the day my mediocre life would intersect with actual important spy stuff. This is how I die? Not from my terrible diet or my family history of heart disease or my complete inability to exercise regularly, but because I used Expedia's seat selection feature? Ben looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. If it helps, he said quietly, you're handling this better than most people would. I'm having a full psychological breakdown, I informed him. This is just what my breakdowns look like. Internal screaming, external sarcasm. It's my brand. The plane touched down, actual wheels on actual tarmac, and I felt that little surge of relief you always get when you land successfully. Except this time it was mixed with abject terror because landing meant we were about to enter the next phase of whatever fresh hell this was. Through the window, I could see the terminal approaching, but also something else. Vehicles. A lot of vehicles. Police cars, black SUVs, what looked like maybe a SWAT van, all positioned around our gate like we were public enemy number one. Are those for us? I asked, knowing the answer but hoping I was wrong. Clara nodded grimly. Them and whoever else is on board. The plane rolled to a stop, and in that moment of silence before chaos inevitably erupted, I had one crystal clear thought. I really should have just driven to Denver. So we're stopped at the gate now, engines powering down with that distinctive whine that usually signals the end of a flight and the beginning of the mad scramble to grab your carry-on and pretend you're not about to elbow someone in the face to get off this metal prison faster. Except nobody was moving. The seatbelt sign was still on, glowing like an angry red eye of doom, and there was this weird suspended animation quality to everything, like we were all extras in a movie waiting for the director to yell action so we could start the next scene of whatever disaster film this had become. The marshals, Severe Bang's woman and bench press cars guy, were positioned strategically in the aisles now, one in first class, one near the middle of the plane, and they had that alert stillness that predators get right before they pounce. You know that nature documentary vibe where the lion is watching the gazelle and you're sitting on your couch eating chips thinking, oh, that gazelle is so dead? Yeah, that energy. Except in this scenario, I wasn't sure if I was the gazelle or just an innocent bystander about to get trampled in the inevitable chaos. Black jacket guy was still in his seat, hands folded, picture of calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept flicking between the marshals and the exit and someone, in the back of the plane. His jaw was clenched so tight I'm surprised his teeth didn't shatter from the pressure. Clara was beside me, her hand still on my arm like she was afraid I might bolt or faint or do something equally unhelpful. Ben had moved to the cockpit door, blocking it with his body in a way that was definitely not standard flight attendant procedure. And me? I was just standing there like an idiot, watching my life turn into a Tom Clancy novel I definitely didn't remember signing up for. That's when Severe bangs Marshall. I decided to call her Agent Badass because she definitely earned the title, moved with sudden purpose toward the economy section. Specifically, toward row 14. Specifically, toward where I had been sitting approximately 10 minutes ago when my biggest concern was whether the in-flight Wi-Fi would work and if I'd have time to watch an episode of The Office before landing. She reached up to the overhead bin directly above seat 14C. My seat. The seat I'd chosen because of a stupid airline algorithm and my preference for aisle access, and popped it open with a smooth, practiced motion that suggested she'd done this before. Probably too many times before. Time did that weird slow motion thing that happens in movies and also apparently in real-life crisis situations. I watched her hand disappear into the bin, moving past the regulation-sized carry-ons and personal items, reaching toward the back where most people don't look, because who actually checks the far reaches of an overhead bin? That's where forgotten items go to die, where someone's left-behind neck pillow lives out its sad existence until a cleaning crew eventually finds it 6 months later. But Agent Badass wasn't looking for forgotten items. Her hand emerged holding something small, metallic, about the size of a lunchbox, maybe, with wires visible on one side, and, oh God, oh no, a little light blinking red like a furious Christmas decoration designed by someone's worst nightmare. A device. An actual, literal device that was definitely not supposed to be in an overhead bin, definitely not supposed to be on a plane, and definitely, absolutely, categorically not supposed to be blinking red like it was counting down to something catastrophic. The bin above my head. The seat I'd been sitting in. The space where I'd been planning to put my neck pillow and maybe catch a nap while we flew over flyover country. I froze. Like, completely and utterly froze. Every muscle in my body locked up simultaneously, and my brain just started screaming this high-pitched internal wail that would have been embarrassing if I wasn't too busy being absolutely terrified to care about embarrassment. That had been above my head. That blinking red nightmare had been sitting approximately 18 inches from my skull for the entire time we'd been taxiing and taking off. Behind me, I heard Tara gasp. Actually gasp, like a character in a Victorian novel who'd just seen someone's ankle. And that's how I knew this was serious. Tara doesn't gasp. Tara has seen compound fractures and childbirth, and that time I tried to cook Thanksgiving dinner. The woman is unflappable, but she was definitely flapped now. Dude, Liam's voice carried from his seat, and for once, he didn't sound cheerful or oblivious. He sounded genuinely shaken, which was somehow more terrifying than the device itself. Dude, that was above your head. That was literally right above where you were sitting. Thanks, Liam. Really helpful observation there, buddy. A+ commentary on the obvious situation. Gold star for stating what we can all clearly see with our functioning eyeballs. The cabin erupted. And I mean erupted, like a volcano of human panic and terror that had been building pressure and finally found its release valve. Someone screamed, high-pitched, genuine horror movie scream. A kid started crying. That soul-deep wail that children do when they sense something is very wrong even if they don't understand what. Someone else was shouting in what might have been Spanish or Portuguese. I couldn't tell because my linguistic processing had shut down in favor of pure survival mode. A woman in a business suit. Different from the cockpit watching woman, because apparently this flight was just lousy with suspicious business suit people, jumped up and shouted, "It's remote triggered. Don't move. Nobody move." Which, okay, first of all, how did she know that? Was she also an agent? Was everyone on this plane some kind of undercover operative except me, and maybe that poor grandma who'd been trying to calm down teenage panic attack kid? Had I accidentally bought a ticket on the Federal Agent Express and nobody thought to mention it during booking? Second, telling a plane full of panicking people not to move is like telling water not to be wet. It's theoretically a good idea, but fundamentally impossible. People were half standing, grabbing their bags, reaching for their phones, doing all the things humans do when confronted with mortal danger and absolutely zero training on how to handle it. Bench press cars Marshall. Agent Muscles, I decided, moved down the aisle with surprising speed for someone his size, his voice booming over the chaos. Everyone remain calm. Stay in your seats. Federal agents, you are safe. We have this under control. Narrator voice, they did not, in fact, have this under control. Agent Badass was holding the device like it was a live snake, her face a mask of concentration, and she was speaking rapidly into what I assumed was some kind of communications device hidden in her collar or ear or wherever secret agents hide their secret communication things. I couldn't hear what she was saying over the general pandemonium, but her expression suggested it wasn't, "Hey guys, false alarm. This is actually just someone's very elaborate lunch container." Black Jacket Guy chose this moment to make his move. He stood up fast, too fast, with that explosive energy of someone who's been coiled and waiting for the right moment, and his hand went to his jacket. I saw it happening like it was a slow-motion action sequence, saw Agent Muscles registering the threat, saw everything about to go from bad to catastrophically worse. "Gun!" Someone shrieked, because apparently we hadn't hit our quota of terrifying things happening in rapid succession. But Agent Muscles was faster. He had his own weapon drawn before Black Jacket Guy could fully reach his, and suddenly we had a Mexican standoff situation happening at 30,000 feet. Well, technically 0 feet now because we were on the ground, but the altitude of the drama was definitely elevated. "Hands where I can see them," Agent Muscles commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife through butter. "Do it now." Black Jacket Guy's hand froze halfway to his jacket, his face calculating odds, weighing options. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, the cost-benefit analysis of whatever his next move was going to be. And then, slowly, so slowly it was almost theatrical, he raised his hands in surrender. Except his eyes weren't surrendering. His eyes were looking past Agent Muscles, past the device, past all the chaos, and they landed on teenage panic attack kid in the back, who had gone completely silent and completely still in a way that was somehow more disturbing than his earlier freakout. Clara's grip on my arm tightened to the point of pain. "This is wrong," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "He's not the primary. He's a decoy. A decoy. Because of course, why would anything about this situation be straightforward? Why would there be just one threat when you could have multiple threats, layered like some kind of nightmarish lasagna of danger?" The woman in the business suit who'd shouted about the device being remote-triggered pulled out her own badge, adding herself to the growing collection of federal agents who'd apparently decided this flight was the place to be. "Bomb squad is on the way," she announced to Agent Badass. "ETA 2 minutes. Do not attempt to disarm. 2 minutes. 120 seconds. The device was still blinking its angry red blink, counting down to God knows what, and we had 2 minutes before people who actually knew what they were doing arrived to maybe, hopefully, prevent us all from becoming a tragic news story. I looked at Tara, who had gone pale. Actually pale, like someone had drained the color from her face, and she looked back at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear. Real, genuine, unfiltered fear. Not concern, not worry, but actual terror. And that's when I realized something horrible. She'd thought I was being dramatic before. She'd thought I was having another one of my anxiety episodes, making a scene, being my usual paranoid self. But now she understood. Now she knew. I'd almost died today. We'd all almost died. And it was pure dumb luck, or Clara's intervention, or whatever cosmic force had decided I deserved another day, that we were still breathing. "I'm sorry," I said to her, though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. For almost dying? For being right about something being wrong? For choosing seat 14C? She just shook her head, tears actually forming in her eyes, and mouthed back, "I love you." Which was touching and terrifying because Tara doesn't get emotional in public. Tara doesn't cry. Tara is the rock, the stable one, the person who holds it together when everything falls apart. If she was crying, we were definitely all about to die. Okay, so here's a fun fact I learned today. When multiple federal agencies converge on a commercial aircraft because there's a literal explosive device in the overhead bin. Things get chaotic in ways that would make a Black Friday sale at Walmart look like a peaceful meditation retreat. I'm talking organized chaos, the kind where everyone's moving with purpose, but it still feels like the universe is having a full-blown panic attack, and we're all just along for the ride. The bomb squad arrived in what felt like both an eternity and 3 seconds simultaneously. Time does weird things when you're contemplating your own mortality, and they came dressed like they were about to explore Mars. Full hazmat-looking suits, helmets with face shields, equipment that probably cost more than my house, the whole intimidating package. They moved through the plane like a well-oiled machine, and suddenly Agent Badass wasn't the scariest person in the vicinity anymore, which was saying something because that woman could probably kill someone with a severe look and proper motivation. They'd evacuated everyone from economy through the rear exit, down those inflatable slides that look fun in theory but are actually terrifying in practice, especially when you're sliding towards safety while there's a bomb still on the plane you just exited. I could see passengers scattered on the tarmac below through the window, looking like confused ants whose anthill had just been kicked by a vindictive god. Liam was down there somewhere, probably still trying to figure out if this was a prank show. Tara had been escorted off separately, some kind of protocol about keeping potential witnesses separated, which sounded ominous but probably made sense to people who did this for a living. But me? I was still in the galley with Clara and Ben, watching the bomb squad work through that gap in the curtain like I was the world's most anxious theater patron at the worst play ever written. Apparently, I was being kept separate because I was material to the investigation, which was official speak for, "You're the idiot who sat in the wrong seat, and we need to figure out how much trouble you're in." Clara had ditched her flight attendant vest at some point and was now wearing an FBI jacket that she'd pulled from God knows where. Maybe they just keep them stashed in the galley next to the extra peanuts and emergency wine. Turns out my suspicions were correct. She wasn't just a concerned employee of the airline. She was Special Agent Clara Mendez, and she'd been undercover on this flight for 3 weeks, working multiple routes, waiting for this exact situation to develop. 3 weeks. I'd squeaked when she told me, my voice doing that embarrassing thing where it goes up an octave. "You've been playing flight attendant for 3 weeks waiting for someone to try to blow up a plane?" "Actually, we've been tracking this cell for 6 months, she'd replied, adjusting her jacket with the casual confidence of someone who regularly deals with domestic terrorism before lunch. "This flight was flagged 2 days ago. We knew they were planning something. We just didn't know exactly what or who the target was. And you let the flight happen anyway?" I felt my voice rising, hysteria creeping in around the edges like an unwelcome party guest. "You knew there was going to be an attempt, and you just let us all get on the plane?" Agent Badass, who I'd learned was actually Special Agent Patricia Morrison, but I was sticking with my nickname because it fit better, walked over, having apparently handed off the explosive device to the bomb squad guys who were now doing their bomb squad thing with it in the jetway. "We had no choice," she said bluntly, no apology in her tone. "If we'd canceled the flight, they would have known we were onto them. They would have scattered, gone underground, hit another target we couldn't predict. This way, we controlled the environment." "Controlled," I repeated flatly. "There was a bomb 18 inches from my head, and you call that controlled? You're alive, aren't you?" She had a point, but I was too busy being indignant to acknowledge it properly. Ben, who turned out to be exactly what he appeared to be, just a regular flight attendant who'd been read in on the situation this morning and was probably regretting his career choices, handed me another bottle of water. I'd gone through 3 already. My stress drinking had reached hydration levels that would make a fitness influencer proud. My hands were still shaking, that post-adrenaline tremor that makes you feel like you've had 17 espressos and a near-death experience. Which, technically, I had. Well, one of those things. The near-death part, not the espresso part, though honestly some espresso would have been great right about now. Clara sat down across from me. We were in the first-class section now. Might as well use the fancy seats since everyone else had been evacuated, and her expression softened from federal agent mode to something approaching actual human empathy. "I need you to understand something," she said, leaning forward with her elbows on her knees. "That seat, 14C, it wasn't random. It was specifically booked for a federal informant who was supposed to be on this flight. My stomach did that fun-dropping thing it does on roller coasters, except this time there was no safety harness and the drop was pure existential dread. An informant. I said slowly, my brain trying to process this information through the fog of shock and dehydration. You're telling me I almost got blown up because I accidentally stole a snitch's seat? Witness, Agent Morrison corrected, because apparently the terminology mattered when you were discussing who gets to die in an explosion. He was set to testify against a domestic extremist group with ties to white nationalist organizations. They'd threatened him, threatened his family, the whole 9 yards. We were relocating him under federal protection. And he just what? Decided not to fly? Overslept? Got cold feet about the whole witness protection thing. I could hear my voice getting higher again, that spiral of hysteria threatening to take over completely. Clara shook her head. He changed his flight last minute. Took an earlier one because his daughter had a recital he didn't want to miss. We got the notification at literally the last second, tried to bump you or get you moved, but the flight was full and you'd already boarded and she spread her hands in a gesture of helpless frustration. Everything happened too fast. So let me get this straight, I said, counting on my fingers because visual aids help when processing traumatic information. Your witness ditched his assigned seat to go see his kid's recital, which, adorable, good dad, no judgment there, and I randomly selected that exact seat through Expedia's algorithm because I wanted aisle access and slightly more legroom. And because of this cosmic coincidence, a domestic terrorist cell thought I was the informant and planted a bomb to kill me. Does that about sum it up? That's the situation, yes, Agent Morrison confirmed, and I couldn't tell if I detected a hint of sympathy in her voice or if I was just projecting my desperate need for someone to acknowledge how absolutely insane this was. This is how I die, I muttered, mostly to myself. Not from my terrible diet or my family history of heart disease or that one time I tried to pet a raccoon in college, but because I used a booking website and liked aisle seats. This is my legacy. This is what they'll write on my tombstone. Here lies a man who made poor seating choices. Ben actually snorted at that, quickly covering it with a cough when Agent Morrison shot him a look. You're not going to die, Clara said firmly, her hand reaching out to squeeze my shoulder in what was probably meant to be a reassuring gesture, but mostly just reminded me that I had functioning nerve endings that were currently screaming in terror. The device is secure. The suspects are in custody. Wait, suspects plural? I interrupted. How many people were trying to kill me? Kill the guy whose seat I stole. At least 4 on the plane, Agent Morrison said, ticking them off on her fingers like she was listing grocery items instead of attempted murderers. Black jacket guy, real name Marcus Webb, known associate of the group. The teenager in the back, Tyler Chun, recruited online, didn't know what he was really getting into until it was too late. Business suit woman who called out the device. That was actually Agent Reeves, one of ours. And we're still identifying the 4th, but we have them contained. For people. For actual human beings who'd woken up this morning, brushed their teeth, probably had breakfast, and thought, yeah, today's a good day to blow up a plane full of innocent people. The casual evil of it made my brain hurt. My phone buzzed then. I'd forgotten I even had it, forgotten that the outside world still existed beyond this nightmare scenario. I pulled it out, expecting more texts from Maya, probably wondering why CNN was reporting on our flight, or maybe my mom having a maternal panic attack. But it wasn't Maya. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't anyone in my contacts at all. Unknown number. One text. 6 words that made my blood run colder than the airplane AC had managed all day. We know you got off the plane. I stared at it, reading it over and over like maybe the words would rearrange themselves into something less threatening. Like maybe it was a wrong number, or autocorrect had butchered someone's innocent message about getting off work or getting off the couch, or literally any other interpretation of getting off that didn't involve domestic terrorists tracking my movements. Clara saw my face, which had apparently gone from traumatized survivor to person seeing a ghost, and was immediately on alert. What is it? I held out the phone with a trembling hand, watched her and Agent Morrison read the message. Watch their expressions go from concerned to professionally alarmed, which is like regular alarm, but with better posture and training. That's not good, Ben said, which was the understatement of the century and earned him another look from Agent Morrison that could have curdled milk. They're still active, Clara said, already pulling out her own phone, typing rapidly. They have spotters, probably watching the gate, maybe even inside the terminal. They know the hit failed. They know someone got off, and now And now they think I'm the informant. I finished, my voice surprisingly steady considering my internal organs were currently attempting to escape through my ribcage. They think I'm the guy they were trying to kill, and I just became a walking target. Agent Morrison was already moving, speaking into her radio, calling for additional security, using codes and abbreviations I didn't understand, but which all sounded very urgent and very bad for my continued survival. Clara stood up, her hand automatically going to the gun holstered at her hip. When had she gotten a gun? Had she had it the whole time? Was everyone on this plane armed except me? And looked at me with an expression that was part apology, part determination. "We're going to protect you," she said. "You're going to be fine. You literally just told me there are domestic terrorists watching the terminal who think I'm a federal witness." I pointed out, my capacity for sarcasm apparently surviving even in life-threatening situations. "Fine seems like a strong word choice here. You're going to be alive," she amended. "How's that?" "Better," I admitted. "Still terrifying, but better." Through the window, I could see more vehicles arriving. Black SUVs, more police cars, what looked like actual military vehicles which seemed excessive, but maybe that was just standard protocol for domestic terrorism on a Tuesday. The terminal had been evacuated. I could see people being herded away from our gate, could imagine the confusion and fear rippling through the airport. And somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting, trying to figure out if they'd succeeded or if they needed to adjust their plans. Plans that now apparently included me. "So what happens now?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Clara and Agent Morrison exchanged a look, some silent federal agent communication that I wasn't privy to. "Now," Agent Morrison said, "you disappear." Disappear is one of those words that sounds cool when Jason Bourne says it, but significantly less cool when you're a 32-year-old IT support specialist whose biggest act of rebellion is using the office microwave for fish on Fridays. I don't have spy training. I don't have a particular set of skills acquired over a very long career. I can barely remember my own Wi-Fi password half the time. And yet here I was, being told I needed to go into hiding like I was suddenly important enough to warrant federal protection, which was flattering and absolutely terrifying in equal measure. They moved us, and by us, I mean me, Tara, and Liam, because apparently your spouse and your idiot best friend count as close associates, who might also be targets, into a secure area of the airport that I didn't even know existed. We're talking through maintenance corridors, past restricted access doors that required key cards and retinal scanners, down hallways that looked like they belonged in a dystopian video game. The whole thing had this surreal quality, like I'd accidentally wandered into a different reality where my boring life had suddenly become an action thriller and nobody had bothered to give me the script. The room they put us in was some kind of VIP lounge meets FBI operations center. There were plush chairs that probably cost more than my car, a fully stocked bar that we weren't allowed to touch. Rude. And approximately 17 federal agents scattered around like very serious party guests who'd forgotten how to have fun. Laptops were open everywhere. People were speaking in low, urgent tones. And there was this energy in the air that said, "We're professionals handling a crisis," mixed with "this is not how we wanted to spend our Tuesday." Tara was sitting next to me on a leather couch that was way too nice for the amount of stress sweating I was currently doing. She'd been silent for the past 20 minutes, processing everything, and I could practically see the wheels turning in her head. My wife is a lot of things, pragmatic, skeptical, occasionally judgmental of my life choices, but she's not someone who panics easily. She sees trauma in the ER on a daily basis, has held people's hands while they died, has dealt with more bodily fluids than should be legal. But this was different. This was personal. "So," she finally said, her voice tight, controlled, the way it gets when she's really upset but trying not to show it. "When the flight attendant gave you that napkin, when she told you to get off the plane, that was real." "Yep," I said, popping the P, because apparently even in crisis situations I default to being annoying. "That was very real. Very, very real. And I told you to relax." "You did say that, yes. I told you that you were overthinking things. That is an accurate summary of your position, correct?" She turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt. Real, genuine, crushing guilt. "You almost died because I didn't listen to you." "Hey, no, that's not." I started, but she cut me off. I told you to calm down. I said you always overthink everything. I basically gaslit you into staying in a seat that had a bomb above it. Her voice was cracking now, tears starting to form, and Tara doesn't cry. Like, ever. I'd seen her cry maybe 3 times in our entire relationship, and one of those was at a particularly sad dog food commercial that caught her off guard. You didn't know? I said firmly, reaching for her hand. Nobody knew. Well, except Clara and the other agents. But they have training and clearance, and probably therapy for this exact situation. You're a nurse, not a mind reader. How were you supposed to know that my anxiety was actually justified this one time? I should have listened to you, she insisted, wiping at her eyes aggressively like she was mad at them for producing tears. I always tell you to listen to women more often, and then the one time a woman literally tries to save your life, I tell you to ignore her. Liam, who'd been sitting across from us scrolling through his phone, because of course he was, finally looked up and contributed to the conversation in his uniquely Liam way. To be fair, Tara, he does overthink everything. Like, remember that time he convinced himself the Chinese restaurant was a front for money laundering because they had really fast service? That was a legitimate concern, I protested. Nobody makes dumplings that fast naturally. It defies the laws of physics. It was a chain restaurant, Tara said, a slight smile breaking through despite everything. They have industrial steamers. Still suspicious, I muttered, but I was glad to see her smile, even if it was at my expense. Especially if it was at my expense, actually. If she was making fun of me, it meant she was processing, coping, returning to some version of normal. Agent Morrison walked over then, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that suggested she had information and none of it was good news. We've completed the preliminary debrief of the suspects, she said, getting straight to business because pleasantries were apparently optional when dealing with terrorism. Tyler Chun, the teenager, is cooperating fully. He was recruited online through gaming forums, thought he was part of some patriot movement, didn't realize what he'd actually signed up for until he was in too deep. That's the kid who was freaking out, I said, remembering his panic attack, the way he'd kept saying he couldn't do it. He didn't want to go through with it. No, he didn't, Clara confirmed, appearing from wherever agents materialize from when you need exposition. He was supposed to be a lookout, report when the target boarded. But they gave him a backpack with what he thought were pamphlets and spare equipment. Turns out it was a secondary device, backup plan in case the primary failed. Jesus Christ, Liam breathed, and for once he sounded appropriately serious. A kid. They used an actual kid. Extremist groups often recruit young men who feel alienated or disenfranchised, Agent Morrison said, launching into what sounded like a rehearsed explanation. They offer community, purpose, belonging. By the time the recruit realizes what they're actually part of, they're in too deep to back out without consequences. What happens to him? Tara asked, her nurse instincts kicking in, always worried about the people involved even when those people were technically terrorists. Juvie, probably. Then witness protection depending on his testimony, Clara said. He's 17, first offense, coerced into participation. The DA will work with him. He's more useful as a witness than a defendant. And Black Jacket guy? I asked, remembering those cold eyes, the way he'd stared at me like I was already dead. Marcus Webb. Career criminal, multiple priors, known associate of the Sovereign Citizens Brigade. That's the group behind this, Agent Morrison said, pulling up something on her tablet. He's not talking. Neither is his partner, the actual triggerman who planted the device. But we have enough evidence without their cooperation. Wait, the triggerman was on the plane? Liam sat up straighter, suddenly paying full attention. Like, the guy who actually put the bomb there was sitting in the cabin with us? Row 23, window seat, Clara confirmed. Posed as a business traveler, boarded early, planted the device during the boarding chaos when everyone's shoving luggage around and not paying attention. He was supposed to disembark before takeoff, claim illness or family emergency, but we locked down the plane too fast. That's why you rushed the return to gate, I said, pieces clicking together. You knew he was still on board. We knew someone was still triggering the timer remotely, Clara said. Webb was the spotter, the backup, but the primary operative was still on board adjusting the detonation based on our actions. Once we started the return, he couldn't get off without being obvious. So everyone on that plane was either a terrorist, a federal agent, or a completely innocent person who had no idea they were caught in the middle of a counterterrorism operation, I summarized. That's absolutely insane. Welcome to my job, Agent Morrison said dryly. It's exactly as glamorous as you'd imagine. An agent I hadn't seen before. Young guy, probably fresh out of Quantico or wherever they train FBI people, walked over and handed Agent Morrison a folder. She scanned it quickly, her expression neutral, but her body language suggesting the news wasn't great. We've identified the source of the text message sent to your phone, she said, looking at me. Burner phone, already ditched, but they made the call from inside the terminal. The temperature in the room seemed to drop about 20 degrees. Inside, I repeated slowly, as in they're here. Right now? In this airport. We're searching, but it's a large facility with thousands of people moving through hourly, she admitted, which was FBI speak for, we have no idea where they are, and that's terrifying. So what you're saying is, Liam interjected, because he always had to be the one to state the obvious. There are still terrorists actively looking for him. They're somewhere in this building, and we're just sitting here? In this fancy lounge, like targets in a very expensive shooting gallery. You're in the most secure location in the airport, Agent Morrison said, but she didn't sound as confident as I would have liked. We have multiple exits, armed personnel, surveillance on every entrance. But they're still out there, Tara said quietly. They still think he's the witness. They still want him dead. Nobody contradicted her because there was nothing to contradict. She was absolutely, 100% correct. Clara sat down across from us, her federal agent mask slipping just slightly to reveal the actual human underneath. Look, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. You're in danger. All three of you, but especially you, she pointed at me, because they think you're the informant. They've invested resources, taken risks, exposed operatives. They're not going to just walk away. So what do we do? I asked, hating how small my voice sounded, how scared. Do we just stay here forever? Live out our days in this overpriced lounge, eating fancy peanuts and waiting for domestic terrorists to lose interest? We protect you until we've neutralized the threat, Agent Morrison said. That means secure transport, safe house, maybe temporary relocation until we've rounded up the rest of the cell. How long are we talking? Tara asked, ever practical. Days? Weeks? Could be months, Clara admitted. These things take time. We need to follow the evidence, make arrests, ensure there are no other active operatives. Months, I interrupted, laughing in disbelief. You want us to go into hiding for months because I accidentally sat in the wrong seat on an airplane. This is my life now. This is actually happening. Hey, Agent Morrison said, and her voice had softened just slightly, traded some of that professional distance for something approaching sympathy. You're handling this better than most people would. I've seen grown men completely fall apart over less. You've got survivor sarcasm. It's a thing. It's actually a really healthy coping mechanism. Survivor sarcasm, I repeated, testing the phrase. That's what we're calling my complete psychological breakdown. Because I'm definitely breaking down here. This is just what my breakdowns look like. Internal screaming, external wit. It's my brand. It's a good brand, Clara offered. Better than most. Tara squeezed my hand. Liam gave me a thumbs up that was probably meant to be encouraging, but mostly just reminded me that he was an idiot who I loved despite his complete lack of situational awareness. And somewhere in this airport, someone was looking for me. Someone who wanted me dead. Someone who thought I was important enough to kill. Me. The guy who once got stuck in a beanbag chair for 20 minutes because I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. This was my life now. And honestly, I'd really prefer it if it wasn't. That night, they stuck us in a secure hotel that looked like every other business hotel I'd ever stayed in, except this one had armed guards in the hallway and bulletproof windows, which really killed the ambience. Tara and I lay side by side in the king bed, staring at the popcorn ceiling like it held answers to life's greatest mysteries. It didn't. It just had popcorn texture and probably asbestos. My phone buzzed. Liam, texting from his room next door. Bro, that was insane. Also, I still think Clara was into you. I typed back. She literally saved our lives, Liam. Exactly, he replied. Girls love a guy they can rescue. I blocked his number for an hour, which was becoming a regular hobby. But lying there, I realized something profound. I'd spent years thinking I was unshakable, cool, logical, the guy who never panics and always has it together. Turns out, I'm the guy who almost died because he didn't want to make a scene. So yeah, next time someone tells you to fake being sick and get off a plane, just do it. Because sometimes survival isn't about being brave. It's about listening when someone's trying to save your ass.